Hello everyone and welcome to another Engine Snack. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler and we're taking a look at a fine technical performance from Berserk against BlackMarlin in the TCEC Season 22 Qualification League. One of the nice things about the Qualification League is that you see quite a few endgame grinds. In Division P, Stockfish and Leela and Komodo are such strong defenders that, you don't see many successful grinds. But Qualification League, the engines are somewhat weaker, and you really do. And Berserk's been doing a great job from that point of view. This position's very interesting. Black has a horrific pawn structure, 5 isolated pawns, but quite a lot of counterplay with moves like a3 and knight c3. And in fact, in order to attack those pawns, White really needs to move the knight from d4, maybe move it to f3, which opens up the line of the rook on the pawn on d5 and also attacks the pawn on h4. But moving the knight from d4 weakens e2, really takes away some solidity in White's position, so Black's counterplay can really flow. But Berserk found a very nice way of activating itself, without giving Black the most unpleasant counterplay. And it played the move a3. What does a3 do? It stops Black from playing a4 to a3. Black plays rook c3 to attack the pawn, but now White goes knight f3. And the point is, the rook is occupying c3, so Black can no longer play knight c3. Very nice little idea there. Rook b3 played, rook c2, rook takes a3, rook takes d5. What we've got here, Black's won a passed a pawn, but White has made a start at picking up some loose Black pawns. So, I suppose both sides feel they've got something out of it. But White's going to carry on here. A few checks from Berserk, always does that just to show who's the boss. And then knight takes h4, so the first pawn is gone. But after a3, this is pretty dangerous. Rook b8 to b2 is definitely a threat for Black. But Berserk comes up with a very nice idea, and I hadn't really foreseen the full beauty of it until I saw White's 47th move. And that's knight f3, rook b8, and then Berserk gives up the exchange for a pawn. That's quite understandable. It probably was going to happen that you're going to have to do that. But the key thing is, after rook a2, this pawn on f4 is very weak for Black. I mean, it's a double pawn, it's quite close to the White position, so relatively easy to attack. But it does also make this one backwards, so, you would think, is White going to maybe trade the e pawn for the f pawn? You get this rook, knight and 3 against 2 rooks and a pawn. Probably at the human level it's not trivial to defend, but engines defend this sort of material balance. I've seen it quite often. It's not a problem for them. But Berserk has got something much more ambitious in mind, and that's this move knight g1. Beautiful. It's one of those things that simply, all you need to do really is to hold the position for now, stop Black from capturing that pawn, and then you can use the fact that the f pawn is so close to the White position to attack it. But so with a knight on g1, you're just holding e2, and now the rook's coming to f5, maybe even the king coming to f3, or you're going to tie Black down to the defense of this pawn, and then the knight can emerge later again. So Black sort of held the position. Rook came to f5, king to g7, give a little check, and now a very important move from White, h4. Why is that important? Well, we're going to see. We give a little check, we play this other move, f3. We're going to bring our king round to f2, and then crucially, we're going to play the move knight to h3. And why is knight h3 so important? Well, it's attacking the pawn on f4, and when I capture that pawn on f4, it's protecting the pawn on e2. So there's not going to be any time for Black to switch from defending the f pawn into attacking the e2 pawn. That's just not going to be possible. At the same time, from h3, once the rook moves to f5, this knight can even come into g5 to attack the pawn on f7. So it's a really flexible move, and you can see how stretched Black's going to become here. And the game meandered on a little bit. Berserk took its time, enjoyed doing its checks, but eventually the knight comes to e4, which also stops the rook coming to f6 or anything else really coming close to the pawn. And after rook c1, rook f5, just picked up the f4 pawn, and rook 4 against rook 2 and 1. That's a big enough advantage. And Berserk finished it off without any problems. The one thing this really reminded me of, this idea really of bringing the knight back from this seemingly gorgeous d4 square to this defensive g1 square, but that being the key to a win, reminded me very much of an AlphaZero Stockfish game, which is in Game Changer, this wonderful book that Natasha Regan and I wrote and that appeared in 2019, all about AlphaZero. And it was this position in actual fact, because White's got a great centre, a pawn for the exchange as well, but there's going to be counterplay against the c3 pawn. So how do you do that? Do you sort of rush to advance your central pawns and hope that everything's fine? Well, AlphaZero played knight f4. I really remember just being so struck by this. And after rook b3, knight e2. And, the a7 pawn was attacked, and now the central pawns just marched through powerfully. And, that was basically it. But the basis of it was, withdrawing a knight from a seemingly excellent position just to a temporary defensive role, because once the initial initiative has been absorbed, the knight emerges, and the final move of the game was knight d4, which was decisive, threatening either knight c6 or knight f5, pushing the pawns through. So very nice game there from AlphaZero, and of course it's interesting to see a similar theme in this game. A knight looks strong on d4, but the whole point of Berserk's play was to bring it back to g1 to defend the weak pawn on e2. Wonderful play.